So this is a look at the human skeleton, specifically using something called a Euler diagram to examine the bones making up the human skeleton. So first off, just to recap, the human skeleton is a system of bones, cartilage, ligaments, tendons and other tissues that are linked together. Bone tissue looks something like that. Cartilage looks something like that. Ligaments, it's not a great picture, but something like that, and tendons. Now, the skeleton itself is broken up into two main categories, the axial and appendicular skeleton. The axial here is shown in red, and the appendicular skeleton is shown in blue and purple. So looking at our Euler diagram, here it is, you see immediately that we start off with a large circle, and nested within that will be a series of smaller and smaller groupings. Not all Euler diagrams look exactly like this, but this is specifically designed around the human skeleton. So looking first at the axial skeleton, we will start with the head, which is made up of skull, the mandible and maxilla, the jawbones, as well as the ear bones. Ear bones, smallest bones in the body, otherwise known as the ossicles. We have the hammer, over here the anvil and the stirrup. You'll learn more about these bones in grade 12 when we look at sense organs. So in a Euler diagram, basically the way it would work is that because the hammer, the anvil and stirrup all make up the ear bones, they will be nested within this larger circle of the ear bones. The ear bones themselves will group together with the skull, the mandible and the maxilla as part of the head in this larger diagram, larger circle over here. So moving on from the skull, or should I say the head, we have the vertebra, the spine, and the spine itself is made up of a series of different types of vertebra. We start at the top with the cervical vertebra. We then have, following the cervical vertebra up over here, we have the thoracic vertebra, which line up with the thorax. Whoopsie. And then we have the lumbar vertebra around the belly, followed by the sacral vertebra around the bum, and lastly, but not least, the coccyx. Then the rib cage is made up of the ribs and the sternum, and this of course is very important for protecting the internal organs in the upper body, for instance the lungs and the heart. So moving on to the appendicular skeleton, we break the appendicular skeleton up into two major groups. The first one would be the forelimbs and the second the hind limbs. So looking at the forelimbs, it starts over here with the attachment to the axial skeleton with the pectoral girdle, made up of the clavicle and the scapula. So there we have the clavicle and there's the scapula. And then of course we have the arms and the hands. Those are shown as forelimb. There's the pectoral girdle, which connects to the humerus over here. Then we have the radius and the ulna, the carpals and metacarpals and the phalanges. These would all be part of the wrist and the wrist and the hands. So we have the humerus, the radius and the ulna as part of the arms. We have in the hands the carpals, followed by the metacarpals, wrist bones, and lastly the finger bones, the phalanges. Moving on to the hind limb, the legs, we have the pelvic girdle connecting to the axial skeleton. We have the femur bone, which is the thigh bone. We have the patella, knee cap, and the tibia, the fibula, the tarsals, and the metatarsals. So fitting this into our Euler diagram, you can see we have firstly the pelvic girdle, the legs and the feet, all part of this larger group, the hind limbs. Having a look at a slightly different diagram of the hind limb, here you can see the pelvic girdle. At the top is the ilium, and then we also have two other bones making up this pelvic girdle. They fuse together, so it takes a closer look that we're not going to do today, but there's also the pubis and the ischium making up that pelvic girdle. So there, those three bones are represented as a part of the pelvic girdle in this larger circle. Then of course we have the femur, the tibia and the fibula, and of course the knee bone, the patella. All of these making up the legs. Then we move down a little bit further, and you see that we have the feet made up of tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. You might notice that the phalanges share the same name as with the finger bones, but instead of carpals we have tarsals, and instead of metacarpals we have metatarsals for the other foot bones. So there we have tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges, all forming a part of the feet. So that's the appendicular skeleton. We have as well the axial skeleton, and both of those larger groups fitting in as bones of the human skeleton.